The alarms rang through the orbital peace station like giant metal screams, filling every hallway with fear as red lights flashed again and again, showing that something terrible was happening outside. Captain Mira Hale ran through the shaking corridor with fast steps, fighting to stay balanced while the floor trembled under her boots. Each vibration came from enemy fire hitting the station, and every new shock felt stronger than the last. She could hear distant explosions, the crack of braking beams, and the heavy hum of failing machines as she rushed toward the command deck. When she finally reached it, the giant window revealed a sight that made her heart tighten. Space, usually silent and calm, looked like a battlefield on fire. Human ships burst into bright flames as Korolev swarm vessels shot deadly beams across the sky. The Korolev had attacked humanity once many years ago and had been forced to retreat, but now they had returned, and this time their numbers were far greater. Their biggest ship, a monstrous dreadnought with 8 long metallic limbs, moved slowly across the dark like a metal beast ready to crush anything in its way. Mira stepped forward, her jaw tight, as Lieutenant Peake shouted that their defenses were failing and that the station could not hold the line. Mira forced herself to stay steady, even though the doubt in everyone's eyes made the room feel colder. She told them they would hold because they had no other choice and because humanity never backed down. Floating beside her was Ilrek, a soft-voiced alien scientist from the Zilari, whose blue skin reflected the red emergency lights. He was one of humanity's closest allies and had spent months studying human culture, often in ways that confused everyone. Even now, while the station shook around them, he stared at the screens with wide eyes, both terrified and fascinated. A deep vibration rolled through the deck as the enemy dreadnought charged a giant weapon, and for a moment the lights flickered, making the shadows stretch across the room. Then the blast hit. The entire station shook so hard that Mira had to grab the edge of the console to stay on her feet. Metal screamed, sparks burst from broken wires, and part of the ceiling cracked, dropping dust like falling ash. The crew around her shouted reports, their voices trembling as they struggled to keep their systems online. Mira looked again at the dreadnought, its cannon already glowing for another shot, and felt the terrible truth settle inside her. Humanity was outnumbered. The station was breaking apart. The enemy would not stop. The Korolev had come not just to win a battle, but to wipe them out completely. Yet Myra refused to surrender to fear. This station was home to thousands, and beyond it waited Earth, full of families and lives she had sworn to protect. She knew that every second they bought here gave humanity a chance to survive. So she straightened her back, pushed aside her fear, and prepared to fight. As she tightened her gloves and looked at her crew, she saw something change in their faces. They were scared, but they were with her. They trusted her. And that meant the fight was not over. Not yet. Outside, the dreadnought charged again, lighting the darkness with deadly fire. Inside, Captain Mira Hale stood ready, knowing that the coming battle would decide far more than one station's fate. It would decide the future of her whole species. The station shook again as another blast hit from outside. But Ilrek seemed almost unaware of the chaos as he hurried after Mira with his long legs moving in quick. Nervous steps and his 4 arms holding a glowing datapad pressed against his chest. He had been studying humans for months, always curious, always asking strange questions, and always choosing the worst possible moments to share his discoveries, and today was no different. While the command deck buzzed with stress and fear, Ilrek cleared his throat and said he had finally uncovered the truth about how humans reproduce. Mira stared at him in disbelief, unable to decide whether to laugh or yell, and told him sharply that this was not the right time. But Ilrek insisted that it was vital information, raising the datapad like a sacred object. The crew around them paused, their faces mixed with confusion and exhaustion, wondering what kind of discovery could matter during a battle that might end their lives. Ilrek, breathing fast and eyes shining, declared that he had found the key to understanding human survival, human bravery, and human unity. He explained that humans were not strong because of numbers or weapons, but because they built bonds that lasted for years. They created families, protected their young, and shared knowledge across generations. More importantly, he said, humans formed emotional families even without blood, choosing friends and comrades as tightly as if they were born together. That, according to Ilrek, was the reason humans fought so fiercely for one another. Mira blinked, caught between being touched and confused, while Lieutenant Peak whispered that Ilrek was not exactly wrong. Ilrek continued with excitement, explaining that humans survived because they cared deeply, because they protected each other, and because their desire to keep their families safe made them fearless in the face of danger. In his mind, this discovery explained every brave act he had ever seen from humanity, every sacrifice, every moment of unity in the middle of disaster. For a second, even with alarms flashing and the room shaking, a quiet feeling spread through the crew. Mira felt a strange spark of pride, something small but warm in the middle of fear. Ilrek then hesitated and asked in a tiny voice if this meant he was part of the human family too, since he had fought beside them, lived with them, and cared for them. Mira nodded with a small smile, telling him that of course he was. The moment lasted only a heartbeat before another violent hit rocked the station, throwing sparks from overloaded wires and reminding them all that the danger was growing. Mira turned back to her console, pulling up maps of the battlefield, and told Ilrek that his discoveries could wait until after they survived. If he truly wanted to help humanity, she said, he needed to help her save the station now. Ilrek straightened, gripping his datapad, and said he would do everything he could for his adopted family. In that instant, the atmosphere changed again, the warmth turning back into sharp determination as Mira and her team prepared for the next wave of attacks. Outside the windows, enemy ships moved like dark shadows ready to strike. Inside, the humans and their Zilari allies stood together, ready to face whatever came next, bound not by blood but by courage and choice. The battle inside the station began with a terrible crash as metal walls bent and spark showers burst from broken pipes, warning everyone that the Korleth had finally boarded. The air filled with smoke and dust while giant armored shapes forced their way through the ruined bulkheads, each one towering over the humans like a living nightmare. Their limbs were thick and sharp, their eyes burned red like fire trapped inside glass, and their growls shook the hallway. Mira raised her weapon without hesitation and ordered her people to fall into formation, even though fear twitched at the corners of every face around her. The Korleth charged first, their claws slashing the air with a metallic scream. But Myra's team fought back with everything they had. Plasma bursts lit the hall in fast flashes as the humans fired, shouting to one another over the growing roar of battle. The smell of smoke, burning circuits, and hot metal blended into a thick cloud that stung the eyes. Mira moved like a streak of focused energy, jumping over debris, sliding behind broken bulkheads, and firing with perfect aim each time she saw a chance. She hit one of the massive beasts square in the chest, and the explosion of light threw it backward with a heavy crash that shook the ground. But there were more behind it, too many to count, pushing forward with fearless rage. Engineers fought with tools in their hands like improvised weapons. Medics pulled wounded soldiers to safety while dodging claws. And young recruits shouted in panic as sparks rained down from smoking pipes above them. In the middle of all this chaos, Ilrek held a Zilari shock lance tightly between two of his 4 hands, his fingers trembling, his breath shaking. He fired whenever Myra yelled for him to cover her, though every blast made him jump from the sound. Still, he stayed close, refusing to run even when the beasts got dangerously near. Mira heard him shout over the noise that the enemy dreadnought outside was powering something huge, something worse than anything they had seen yet. When she checked her wrist display, her heart sank. It was the Planet Cracker Cannon, a weapon strong enough to burn a world to ash. If it fired, Earth would be gone. The thought hit Mira like a punch to the chest, and for a moment the hallway felt colder than the vacuum outside. She looked around at her people soldiers covered in ash, engineers bleeding from cuts, Ilrek shaking but ready to help, and something inside her hardened like steel. She knew they were alone, the station failing around them, and the enemy numbers far too high, but she also knew this was the moment that defined everything. Earth needed them. Humanity needed them. There was no room for fear. Mira shouted for everyone to push forward and clear the hall, to take back what little ground they still had. Her voice rose over the thunder of crashing metal and firing weapons, a voice strong enough to pull her people together. With new energy, they surged forward. Mira shot another Corleth in the throat and shouted for Ilrek to follow her left flank. He obeyed instantly, fear vanishing behind determination. Even though the ceiling groaned above them and sparks flew like falling stars, Mira did not slow down. She told her team that this was where they fought the hardest, where humans always found a way to stand, even when everything seemed impossible. And as they advanced inch by inch, pushing back the towering beasts with sheer force of will, she promised herself that they would not fall today, not before they bought humanity the time it needed to survive. The launch bay doors opened with a roar as Mira and the surviving pilots rushed into their fighters, the metal floor shaking beneath them from explosions that struck the station again and again. Mira climbed into her small, fast fighter, and Ilrek squeezed himself into the cramped seat behind her, folding his long limbs as tightly as he could, while his hands trembled with both fear and excitement. The moment Mira ignited the engines, the fighter leaped forward, shooting out into space like a silver arrow. Outside, the battlefield was a storm of fire and smoke, with human ships twisting desperately to avoid incoming blasts, while Corleth vessels filled the dark sky like a giant swarm of steel. Ilrek grabbed the sides of his seat as Mira spun the fighter through a deadly path, dodging beams that streaked past them like angry bursts of light. He shouted that she flew like she fought fast, wild, and terrifying, and Mira only smirked, too focused to answer. Explosions flashed around them like giant fireballs blooming in the void. Human ships fought bravely, but many were breaking apart, leaving trails of flame and debris drifting in the darkness. Mira pushed her fighter harder, diving beneath a Corleth destroyer and blasting 2 shots into its underside, making it burst open in a brilliant explosion. She ordered her squadron to follow her toward the largest enemy ship, the dreadnought, because if they could break that monster, the rest of the fleet might fall apart. As they flew closer, the dreadnought loomed larger and larger, its 8 long limbs glowing with energy, its hull covered in living armor that pulsed as if breathing. Cannons all across its body fired in every direction, turning space into a maze of bright, deadly beams. Mira twisted and rolled through narrow openings, barely avoiding blasts that shook the fighter with each near hit. Ilrek yelled warnings each time a cannon charged, and Mira dodged just fast enough to survive. Then the giant core at the center of the dreadnought began to glow with a deep red light like a star waking up. Ilrek checked the readings and shouted that the Planet Cracker cannon was almost ready to fire, and if it did, Earth would be gone in one terrible flash. Mira felt her heartbeat jump, and she demanded a solution, any solution, even a crazy one. Ilrek, hands shaking, pulled out his datapad and connected it to the fighter's systems. Explaining that he had created something strange, a harmonic disruptor inspired by human emotional bonds. The same bonds that had made him believe humans were special. Mira had no time to question how or why that mattered. She simply trusted him. Ilrek activated the device and a soft blue pulse spread out from their fighter, expanding like a gentle wave through the battlefield. When the pulse reached the Corlith ships, something strange happened. They slowed, stumbled, and drifted apart from one another, their perfect coordination collapsing as if a thread had been cut. The Corlith hive link had broken. Mira shouted to all human ships to fire everything they had, and the sky erupted in a storm of bright explosions as missiles and plasma blasts struck the confused enemy fleet. The dreadnought shook violently, great chunks of armor tearing away in flaming pieces, but still the planet cracker cannon burned brighter, now seconds away from firing. Mira locked her eyes on the glowing core, her hands tightening on the controls, knowing that the final moment was coming, and whatever happened next would decide the fate of Earth itself. The dreadnought filled the cockpit window like a dying star as Mira pushed her fighter toward it, the ship shaking under her hands from the violent pressure of speed and damage, while alarms rang loudly in her ears warning her that the engines were close to burning out. Ilrek kept shouting readings behind her, his voice thin with fear, explaining that the planet cracker cannon had reached 90% charge and would fire in moments, wiping out Earth in a single flash. Mira felt a cold weight settle inside her chest as she stared at the glowing red heart of the enemy weapon, knowing that no normal attack would break it in time. She also knew the truth that she had been refusing to say aloud someone had to destroy the core from inside, and the only way to do that was to slam straight into it. She made the decision in a single breath, her mind sharp and steady even though her heart felt like it was cracking. She told Ilrek that he had to leave the ship, and he protested wildly, waving all four hands, shouting that she could not do this because humans needed her alive to make more humans. And she almost laughed at how Ilrek still misunderstood human reproduction at a time like this. She cut him off, voice firm, telling him that humanity did not survive because one person lived, but because everyone risked everything for each other. Before he could argue again, she hit the emergency ejection control, and Ilrek's seat shot away from the fighter in a burst of force, sending him spinning into a small escape pod that sealed itself as it blasted into space. His scream echoed through the communication line for a moment before static swallowed it. With Ilrek safe, Mira turned the fighter directly toward the glowing cannon core inside the dreadnought's massive chest, the red light pulsing brighter with each second like a giant heart ready to explode. She pushed the throttle all the way forward, feeling the fighter shake violently as the engines roared past their limits. Enemy ships fired at her, beams slicing past her wings, but Mira kept going, weaving left and right with perfect control, her eyes locked on the target. She thought of Earth, of the oceans, the forests, the cities full of millions of lives. She thought of her crew who trusted her and of Ilrek who believed she was part of his family. And she thought of the long line of humans who had fought before her, each giving something so the next could live. As the dreadnought's inner walls opened in a massive metal circle, Mira flew straight into the glowing core. Heat filled the cockpit like a rising sun. Light wrapped around her, bright enough to blur her vision. She whispered a final message to her people, telling them to protect each other. Then the impact came. The fighter crashed into the core, and a brilliant explosion burst through the dreadnought, shaking the sky. The giant ship tore apart as a wave of white-hot fire spread outward, ripping its limbs off and sending huge pieces of metal drifting into space. The rest of the Corlith fleet, confused and weakened, broke formation as human forces surged forward, firing wave after wave into the enemy until the entire swarm collapsed and scattered. The planet cracker cannon went dark forever. The battle was won, but the cost was heavy, and Mirahel's final act would never be forgotten. Ilrek woke to the soft hum of medical machines and the gentle glow of white lights above him, his body wrapped in a warm blanket and his mind still echoing with the memory of Myra's scream as the escape pod shot away from the fighter. For a moment he did not remember where he was, but then the smell of clean air and the sound of human voices around him made everything return in a painful rush. A human doctor stood beside him, eyes tired but kind, telling him that he was safe now and that the battle had ended with humanity victorious. Ilrek barely heard the words because his heart felt heavy, like a stone pressing inside his chest. He sat up slowly, wiping at his eyes with two of his hands, asking in a quiet voice whether Captain Mirahale had survived. The doctor's face softened in a way that needed no explanation. Mira was gone. Her sacrifice had destroyed the dreadnought and saved Earth. Ilrek let out a long, shaking breath and looked down at his 4 fingers, which trembled as he remembered her calm voice and unbreakable courage. He felt something new inside him, something he had only seen in humans but had never truly understood until now. Grief mixed with pride. Later, the leaders of the human fleet invited him to a gathering on the command deck of their main ship. The room was filled with soldiers, engineers, medics, and pilots, many still bandaged or bruised, all standing in silence before a large hologram of Myra. Her image floated in the air, glowing softly, captured in the moment before her final flight. Ilrek stepped forward when they motioned for him, holding the datapad he had carried through the entire battle, the same one he had used to record every strange and wonderful thing he had learned about humans. He spoke to the crowd, his voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as he explained what Mira had taught him, not through lessons or speeches, but through the way she lived. He told them he had once studied humans simply out of curiosity, trying to understand how they survived in a galaxy full of stronger, faster, more advanced species. And now he finally understood. Humans did not survive because of biology or technology. They survived because they cared so deeply that they would risk their lives for others. He told them that Mira had protected him even when danger was closing in on all sides, that she had believed he was part of her family even though he was different in every way. He said she showed him that humans reproduced not only through their bodies but through their actions, passing strength, courage, and love from one person to another, shaping future generations with every choice. The room grew silent as Ilrek lifted his datapad and saved the final record under a new title, How Humans Continue, Through Courage, Sacrifice, and Family Chosen in Fire. After the ceremony, Ilrek walked to a quiet window and stared at the stars beyond the glass. The battlefield was gone now, cleaned by the darkness of space. But somewhere among those stars drifted pieces of the fighter Myra had flown into the dreadnought. Ilrek pressed one hand against the window and made a promise in the soft Zilari way. A promise that he would honor her memory by protecting her people just as she had protected him. From that day forward, Ilrek stood with humanity not as an outsider or a scientist but as a brother, ready to face any new threat that rose in the galaxy. And though grief stayed with him like a shadow, so did the fire of Myra's final act, a fire that reminded him every day that humans, no matter how small or fragile they looked, carried something powerful inside their hearts, something strong enough to shake the entire universe.